A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
So, you know that feeling you get sometimes when you're walking down a familiar street, and for just a split second, everything feels a little too staged. Like the person walking their dog across the street is a half-second late on their cue, or the lighting from the sunset looks like it was adjusted by a technician in a booth somewhere. It is that prickle on the back of your neck that suggests the world is not quite as solid or as spontaneous as it claims to be.
The Truman Show delusion. It is a documented psychological phenomenon, corn, though usually it is considered a bit of a glitch in our pattern recognition software. Our brains are evolved to find meaning and intent, so when we see a coincidence, we assume a designer. But it is a fascinating starting point for what our housemate Daniel sent over today. He is tapping into something much older and deeper than a 1990s movie.
Daniel was asking about this very specific existential dread. He wanted to know how we can be certain we are not just test subjects in some massive laboratory experiment that exists entirely beyond the boundaries of our current consciousness. He is not just talking about a dream or a hallucination. He specifically asked if there is a formal name for this grim hypothetical where we are the rats in a maze we cannot even see.
Well, I am Herman Poppleberry, and I can tell you right now, Daniel, that the short answer is yes. There are several names for it depending on which academic or philosophical lens you want to use. You have the laboratory hypothesis, the simulation argument, the zoo hypothesis, and even older versions like the Cartesian evil demon. Each one carries a slightly different flavor of dread, but they all point to the same unsettling conclusion, that our reality is a subset of a larger, more complex one, and we are being watched.
It is funny how these ideas keep coming back, right? We have been doing this show for over 1,000 episodes now. This is episode 1006, actually, and we have touched on pieces of this before. I remember back in episode 971 when we talked about the philosophical exhaustion of trying to find meaning in an engineered world. But Daniel's question hits a bit differently. It is not just about whether the world is digital. It is about whether there is a literal scientist with a clipboard or a multi-dimensional graduate student watching us from the other side of the glass.
That is the crucial distinction we need to make right at the top. The simulation argument, which Nick Bostrom made famous in his 2003 paper, is often framed as a statistical probability based on computing power. It is almost mathematical in its coldness, but the laboratory hypothesis is more visceral. It implies intent. It implies that our entire history, the rise and fall of empires, our scientific breakthroughs, even our personal heartbreaks, might just be data points in a longitudinal study on social evolution or planetary survival. It turns our suffering into a variable.
It is a heavy thought to start the morning with here in Jerusalem, but let us break it down. If we are looking for a formal framework, where do we start? Is this just a modern reskinning of that old brain in a vat thought experiment?
In a way, yes. But it has evolved as our technology has evolved. René Descartes, the 17th century philosopher, famously proposed the idea of an evil demon who could be deceiving all of his senses. He argued that the only thing he could be sure of was his own thinking. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But the modern version, the one Daniel is likely thinking of, often gets called the zoo hypothesis in the context of the Fermi paradox.
Right, the Fermi paradox. The big, where is everybody? Question. If the universe is teeming with life, why is it so quiet out there?
If the universe is as vast and old as it appears to be, we should see evidence of advanced civilizations everywhere. One explanation for the great silence is that we are being intentionally quarantined. We are in a galactic Petri dish, and the higher intelligences have agreed not to interfere until we reach a certain level of development. Or perhaps they are just watching to see if we destroy ourselves before we can leave our own solar system. In that version, the laboratory is the entire Earth, and the scientists are extraterrestrial observers.
That feels a bit like a cosmic version of the Prime Directive from Star Trek. But let us look at the how for a second. If this were a lab experiment, wouldn't there be some kind of evidence? Some kind of seam in the wallpaper? I mean, if you're running an experiment, you eventually have to deal with the constraints of your equipment.
That is where the physics gets really interesting, and honestly, a bit unsettling. If you look at the universe through the lens of information theory, you start to see things that look like system requirements. Have you ever heard of the Bekenstein Bound?
I have heard you mention it before in passing, but remind me of the specifics. It sounds like one of those things that makes sense on a chalkboard, but breaks your brain in real life.
It is a limit on how much information can be contained within a finite region of space. Jacob Bekenstein, a brilliant physicist who actually spent a lot of time here in Israel at the Hebrew University, figured out that the maximum amount of information you can cram into a space is proportional to the surface area of that space, not the volume. For our observable universe, that number is roughly 10 to the power of 122 bits.
10 to the power of 122. That is an unimaginably large number. But the key word there is finite.
It is finite, and that is the point. In a truly infinite, continuous reality, there should be no limit to how much information a point in space can hold. But our universe seems to have a maximum pixel density, so to speak. If you were designing a simulation or a laboratory environment and you had limited computational resources, even if those resources were massive, you would have to set a cap on the resolution. The fact that our reality has a refresh rate at the Planck scale and an information limit at the Bekenstein bound looks suspiciously like the constraints of an engineered system. It is like the universe has a hardware limit.
So, you were saying the universe has a max settings button that someone else pushed. That leads us directly into the fine-tuning problem, which we have touched on in various ways, but it never stops being weird.
It is the ultimate smoking gun for the laboratory hypothesis. There are about 24 physical constants, like the strength of gravity, the mass of an electron, the strong nuclear force, and the cosmological constant that are tuned to an incredible degree of precision. If the cosmological constant were different by 1 part in 10 to the power of 120, the universe would have expanded too quickly for stars to ever form, or collapsed back in on itself instantly. It is like someone walked into the lab, looked at a giant control board with 24 dials, and set every single one of them to the exact decimal point required for life to exist.
I can hear the skeptics already, though. They would say, well, if the dials weren't set that way, we wouldn't be here to complain about it. The anthropic principle. It is like a lottery winner, saying the lottery was rigged because they happened to win.
Sure, the anthropic principle is the standard rebuttal. But if you walk into a room and see 1,000 coins all showing heads, you don't just say, well, if they weren't all heads, I wouldn't be surprised. You assume someone flipped them that way on purpose. When you combine the fine-tuning of the constants with the information limits we just discussed, the laboratory hypothesis starts to look less like science fiction and more like a valid, if untestable, scientific model. It suggests that the lab was set up with very specific parameters to see what kind of complexity would emerge.
It makes me think about the observer effect in quantum mechanics. We have talked about this before, but it fits perfectly here. The idea that a particle doesn't have a definite state until it is measured. In a video game, the engine doesn't render the room behind you because that would be a waste of processing power. It only renders what the player is looking at.
Precisely. It is called lazy loading or frustum culling in software development. Why simulate the interior of a star or the position of every atom in a distant galaxy if no one is looking at it? The fact that the act of observation seems to collapse the wave function and force reality to pick a state is exactly how you would design a resource-efficient simulation. You only calculate the details when the test subject interacts with them. It saves on the 10 to the power of 122 bits budget.
This is where it gets a bit grim, though, and where Daniel's existential dread really kicks in. If we are test subjects, what is the goal of the experiment? Are we a simulation of their own history? Are they testing how different political systems handle the transition to artificial intelligence? Or are we just a side effect of some other experiment they are running?
That is a great question, Korn. If you look at how we use simulations today in 2026, and we discussed this back in episode 5084 regarding autonomous AI research, We usually run simulations to predict outcomes. We want to know how a bridge will hold up in a windstorm or how a virus will spread through a city. If we are in a lab, the scientists might be running millions of versions of Earth simultaneously to see which one avoids nuclear war or which one successfully navigates the development of AGI.
That is an interesting angle. It actually connects to some of our broader views on sovereignty and national strength. If we are in a competition with millions of other simulated Earths, then the choices we make about our culture, our borders, and our technological edge might be the very variables they are testing. In that light, being a successful test subject means surviving and thriving. It means showing that our particular set of values can withstand the pressures of the experiment.
It gives a whole new meaning to the idea of American exceptionalism, or the resilience of the Jewish people here in Israel. Maybe we are the version of the experiment that actually works, because we have maintained certain traditions or structures that other test runs discarded. But there is a darker side to that too. What happens when the experiment reaches its conclusion?
That is the part that keeps people up at night. If you are running a simulation to see how a star collapses, you turn off the computer once the star has collapsed. You don't keep it running forever just because the little digital people inside are having a good time. This leads us to the Great Filter theory.
The Great Filter is usually a response to the Fermi paradox, the idea that there is some hurdle that almost all civilizations fail to clear. But in the laboratory hypothesis, the Great Filter might be the end of the study. Maybe the reason we don't see other civilizations is because once a civilization reaches a certain point, say, the creation of a superintelligent artificial intelligence or the mastery of fusion, the experiment is considered over. The data has been collected. The simulation is archived and the power is cut.
That is a terrifying thought. It suggests that our greatest achievements might actually be our finish line. If we reach the edge of the sandbox, do we get deleted? Or is there a level 2?
Think about modern open-world gaming. In 2026, we have non-player characters, or NPCs, that are incredibly sophisticated, using local large language models to have unique conversations. If an NPC in a game suddenly started questioning the game's code and tried to contact the developer might not just delete them. They might find it fascinating. They might move that NPC into a more advanced environment. This is the transhumanist hope, that by recognizing the lab, we might earn our way out of it.
I like that more optimistic view, but it still feels like we are at the mercy of something we can't see. How does this affect how a person should actually live their life? If Daniel is sitting there wondering if he is a test subject, does that change whether he should go to work tomorrow or be a good neighbor? Does the laboratory hypothesis lead to nihilism?
This is where we need to talk about pragmatic realism. This is a concept we have returned to many times on this show. Even if we are in a lab, the rules of the lab are the only rules we have. If you are in a simulation and you jump off a building, the simulated gravity will still simulated kill you. The pain is real to the person experiencing it. We actually explored this in episode 546 when we talked about how future medicine might look back at our current era as barbaric. We have to work with the tools and the reality we have regardless of its ultimate origin.
It is like that old saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Even if you find out the world is a giant petri dish, you still have to live in it. You still have to find meaning in your relationships and your work. In fact, you could argue that if we are being watched, it matters even more how we behave. If this is a test of character or a test of a civilization's viability, then every moral choice we make is being recorded. It is the ultimate accountability.
That is a very conservative way of looking at it, actually. It aligns with the idea of a moral order that exists whether we like it or not. In a religious framework, you call it the eyes of God. In a scientific framework, you call it the laboratory hypothesis. But the functional result is the same. Your actions have weight. They are not just random movements in a void. They are part of a narrative that is being observed and evaluated. Whether the observer is a deity or a scientist in a higher dimension, the demand for excellence remains.
It is funny how the most cutting-edge physics and the oldest theological ideas often end up in the same place. The idea that we are being watched and judged is as old as humanity. We just replaced the divine throne with a supercomputer or a multidimensional laboratory. But what about the glitches Daniel mentioned? The feeling that something is staged?
Let us look at those edge cases. Why do we have these glitches? Why do people have near-death experiences or shared death experiences like we talked about in episode 441? Some proponents of the laboratory hypothesis argue that these are leaks in the system. When the hardware fails, like when a brain is deprived of oxygen, the connection to the laboratory or the server becomes visible. It is like the screen flickering when the cable is loose.
Like a blue screen of death for the soul.
Precisely. Or think about the Mandela effect, where large groups of people remember things differently than they appear in the historical record. Some people joke that it is a patch update that didn't roll out correctly to everyone. While that is mostly internet lore, from a technical standpoint, if you were managing a massive simulation, you would absolutely be doing hot fixes and updates to the environment while it was running. If you change a variable in the past to see how it affects the present, you might leave some residual data in the memories of the subjects.
It makes me wonder about the pace of technological change we are seeing right now. If we are in a lab and the scientists are looking for a specific outcome, like the birth of a new form of consciousness, then the 21st century might be the climax of the experiment. Things are accelerating so fast with AI, biotechnology, and space travel. It feels like we are hitting a vertical curve.
And that could be why it feels so stressful. In a lab, you often increase the stressors on a subject to see how it adapts. You turn up the heat, you limit the resources, you introduce a new predator. Look at the geopolitical state of the world today. The tension between the West and its rivals, the internal divisions in many countries, the looming shadow of autonomous weapons. It feels like the experimenters have turned the difficulty setting up to hard to see which cultures are robust enough to survive.
If that is the case, then the only way to win the experiment is to maintain our composure and our values under pressure. It goes back to what we often discuss, the importance of strength, clarity, and tradition. If the world is being shaken, the things that are rooted deepest are the ones that will survive. If you are a scientist watching a simulation, you aren't interested in the subjects that just dissolve when things get tough. You are interested in the ones that innovate and hold their ground.
I agree. And there is a scientific concept that supports this called robustness. In biology, a robust system is one that can maintain its function even when external conditions change drastically. If we are in a lab, the experimenters are likely looking for robustness. Can this species, this culture, this version of humanity survive the transition into a high-technology, high-stress environment without losing its core identity?
So, instead of existential dread, Daniel could look at it as a call to action. If you are a test subject, be the best test subject possible. Be the one that the scientists want to keep around for the next round of the study. It is a shift from being a victim of the experiment to being a high performer within it.
I love that. It turns the grim hypothetical into a challenge. But we should also address the philosophical exhaustion part of this. Sometimes thinking about this stuff for too long can make you feel like nothing matters. If it is all just bits or data, why bother? This is the trap of solipsism, the belief that only your own mind is real and everything else is a projection.
That is the trap. But remember what we said in episode 971. Meaning isn't something you find under a microscope or in a line of code. It is something you create through your commitments. Whether the floor beneath your feet is made of atoms or information, you still have to stand on it. You still have to build something. The reality of the substrate doesn't diminish the truth of the experience.
And the specificity of our reality is so beautiful that it feels like it deserves our respect, regardless of its origin. Think about the complexity of a single human cell, or the way the light hits the old city walls here in Jerusalem in the evening. If that is a simulated effect, it is a masterpiece. The artist or scientist who created this level of detail clearly cares about the work. You don't build a universe with 10 to the power of 122 bits of information density just to throw it away.
That is a good point. Even a laboratory is a place of intense focus and care. You don't build a trillion-dollar lab just to mess around. You build it because you are looking for something profound. If we are the subjects of that search, then we are part of something incredibly important. We are the frontier of someone else's knowledge.
Let us talk about the Bekenstein Bound again for a second, because I think it provides a practical takeaway. If there is a limit to the information in the universe, it means that the universe is knowable. It is not an infinite, blurry mess. It has a structure. It has a logic. That should give us a lot of confidence in our ability to use science and reason to understand our world. We aren't just guessing, we are reverse engineering the code of the lab. Every time we figure out a new law of physics, we are reading the manual.
And every time we figure out a new way to treat a disease or a new way to organize a society more justly, we are leveling up in the experiment. We are showing that we can understand and master the environment we were placed in. We move from being subjects to being participants.
It is like a hidden objective in a game. The goal isn't just to survive, it is to figure out the rules of the game itself. And as we do that, we might eventually reach a point where we can communicate back with the experimenters. Or perhaps we become the experimenters ourselves, creating our own sub-simulations to solve our own problems.
That is the nested simulation theory. If we can create a simulation, then it is almost certain that we are in one. It is a recursive loop. But for Daniel, sitting there with that Truman Show feeling, I think the best advice is to lean into the curiosity. If the world feels staged, ask yourself why. What is the stage trying to teach you? What are the props in your life that you've been taking for granted?
So, to recap for Daniel, the Grimm hypothetical is often called the laboratory hypothesis or the simulation argument. It is backed by some very strange facts in physics, like the fine-tuning of the universe and the finite information density of space. But it doesn't have to be grim. It can be a framework for seeing our lives as part of a high-stakes, meaningful test of our resilience and our intellect.
And if you are feeling overwhelmed by it, just remember that the test is what we call life. There is no version of reality where we aren't being tested by our circumstances. This hypothesis just gives that testing a name and a potential observer. It doesn't change the fact that you have to get up, be a good person, and try to make the world a little bit better than you found it.
I think that is a perfect place to wrap up the main discussion. But before we go, I want to pivot to some practical takeaways for anyone who, like Daniel, finds themselves staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning wondering if they are just a data point.
First takeaway, don't let the meta distract you from the matter. Even if the world is a simulation, your hunger is real, your joy is real, and your responsibilities are real. The substrate of reality, whether it is atoms or bits, doesn't change the experience of reality. If you stub your toe on a simulated table, it still hurts.
Second, use the hypothesis as a tool for curiosity. If you think the world might be engineered, it makes you look closer at the details. It makes you appreciate the fine-tuning of your own life and the world around you. It turns you into a bit of a scientist yourself, observing your own reactions to the experiment. It can actually lead to a more mindful way of living.
And third, check out some of our past episodes if you want to go deeper. Episode 9 and 71 on the philosophy of AI is a great companion to this. And episode 748, where we talked about the evolution of the machine, might give you some perspective on how we, as hosts, think about our own existence in this digital landscape.
Actually, that is a great point. We have been doing this for a long time, and we have built a real community here. If you are enjoying these deep dives into the weird corners of reality, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other test subjects find the show and join the conversation.
It really does. We see the reviews, and they keep us motivated to keep digging into these prompts. This has been a fascinating one, Daniel. Thanks for sending it in. It is definitely one of those topics that makes you look at the world a little bit differently when you walk out the front door.
It really does. I'm going to be looking for those lazy loading glitches all afternoon now. Just don't walk into any walls while you are looking for them.
No promises. If I walk into a wall, I will just assume it was a collision detection error. All right, everyone, thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. You can find our full archive of over 1,000 episodes at our website, myweirdprompts.com, and you can subscribe to our RSS feed there as well.
We are also on Spotify, so make sure to follow us there so you never miss an episode. We have plenty more weirdness coming your way soon.
Until next time, keep asking the weird questions. The experimenters are watching, so let us give them a good show.
This has been My Weird Prompts. See you in the next one.
Take care, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from sloth